Olympia just came out last week, and me and my community have been working super hard to find the best ways to get the most value out of her kit. Today, I'll be sharing what we found alongside some helpful resources and interesting tricks, both to level up your gameplay and approach to the character. This video will assume that you have a base knowledge of Olympia's kit and moveset, so if you're new to the game or don't know her very well, check out our base level Olympia guide linked down below. To kick us off, let's talk about what makes Olympia good, and what's not so great about her. Truthfully, Olympia launched really strong, and I imagine that she'll see some tuning over time to make sure she lands in a balanced state. However, I don't think that the devs will want to nerf the tools that make up her gameplay identity, so I think this guide will age pretty well, even if you're watching it a few months after launch. Olympia's strongest traits are her juggling, scrapping, burst movement, and deep combo game. The fluidity of her kit and fast frame data allow her to string together moves in ways that other characters in the cast simply can't. However, Olympia is held back by her slow run speed, stubby moves, fast fall speed, which makes it easier to extend combos on her, and poor recovery. That last one's a little nuanced, since she does have a lot of mix-ups and tools to get back to stage, but it's also pretty easy to interrupt her and abuse her fast-falling nature in a lot of spots off stage. So at lower and more mid-levels where players might not have edge guarding onto a T, it might not be a big problem that you have to worry about as an Olympia player. For the rest of this video, I'll be breaking down how to get the most out of these strengths and mitigate her weaknesses. Before we get to that, however, it'd mean the world to me if you left a like or subscribe to help boost the channel in the algo. Thanks tons, and let's start by analyzing her kit with breaking down her neutral. Let's get a brief overview of her neutral and setting up for combos. All of Olympia's moves are more or less really fast and safe, even if they are a bit stubby. And her crystal both applies pressure and gives Olympia access to new movement options. I'll talk more about the crystal later though, since I want to get pretty in-depth about it in its own section of the video. The rest of her kit in neutral is all about getting the opponents above her and in the air, allowing her to convert grounded normals into big aerial combos, ending with up special or forward air. To get opponents into the air at lower percents though, I really like up throw since it can't be CC'd. However, down tilt, up tilt, landing nair, up air, bair, and down air, or a crystallization can all pop opponents off the ground. Down tilt and bair are your fastest options here, but their low knockback makes it pretty easy to floor hug. So if that's happening a lot, I would suggest mixing in grabs, different aerials, or jab up tilts. Remember, if you're not finding openings by being aggressive, you can always opt to play a bit more passively, to find openings that way too. You can also cancel down B with shield to dash forwards, allowing you to close gaps or even tank a hit in neutral, which can allow Olympia to turn passive positioning into an aggressive approach in just a few frames. Once you've gotten an opponent off the ground with your combo starters, opponents can obviously no longer CC Olympia's fast, low knockback moves, allowing her to click away. I personally really like to start my aerial combos simple, by bridging players with up air hitfalls, but it's super important to know where to hitfall and where to use a double jump instead. I like to pick stages with this in mind while I play, giving myself access to stages that have platforms readily available for me, especially against floatier characters that might bounce away from my combo extensions. Stages like Godai Delta, Rockwall, Hodojo, and Fire Capital all have lower platforms that can help Olympia out with these extensions a lot, but some are obviously better than others, just depending on the matchup. Getting back to talking about her up air, however, the second hitbox of the move sends opponents down. It's a pretty hard move to confirm into out of a juggle, but when you do, it can open up big mixes by pulling an opponent that would escape a normal up air back down and away from safety in the sky. I found this option to be pretty strong in neutral too, since on the launch patch, her up air is generally pretty safe, and landing the later hitbox can connect into a variety of options that can then be used to open up the air combos we just talked about. Now that we have Olympia's basic combo routes down, I think it's important to talk about mixing in new options based on opponent's weight and DI. I find linking an upward hitting move into down air to be pretty easy when calling out bad DI. This forces a tech chase. I don't think this is necessarily as strong as simply starting a ladder on every character and in every situation, but it allows for a lot of really cool resets and skill expression, opting for a bit more risk, but also a bit more reward. You can also use Nair to change the knockback within a juggle. However, I personally find Nair to be a lot less rewarding on hit, and up air as an extender, and forward air is a finisher, especially at higher percents. So I suggest using this move mid-combo sparingly, if at all. The last aerial you can apply here, in my opinion, is the hardest to master, being back air. This move turns Olympia around, and is really great for landing on opponents with if they start to fall out of a combo, or if you spike them into the ground, since it's got very little in lag. I personally think this will be tuned down, however, but since the in lag is so low currently, you can combo the move into itself with some funny reverse hitboxes, which I think are really cool and funny visually. As said earlier, I prefer to end my aerial combos with forward air or up special. I find fair to be a lot less committal, but as patches progress, Olympia's balance state might not be as easy to land a simple forward air, and you might need to up B instead here. So both are acceptable. If you are able to land a spike hitbox of either forward air or up air to force an opponent to tech on stage, I like to hit fault and then tech chase with down strong, since the move is pretty quick, has a generous hitbox, and good knockback, guaranteeing a ledge trap or ledge guard if not just a simple kill. Now that we have a good overview of her juggling and aerial combo game, let's touch on her crystal, both the mind games, punish potential, and movement options provided by the move. As we touched on earlier, Nair, up air, jab, down tilt, and up tilt are all great tools in neutral to open up opponents. However, all these options can be easily walled out by characters with large disjoints like Clarin and Loxodon. Olympia Crystal, however, sees a lot of value here, by allowing her to break the curse of being doomed to stubby normals forever. By placing Crystal, you threaten opponents with a crystallization, forcing them to pick between targeting you or it. Sadly, the crystal doesn't have a lot of ways to defend itself, so placing it somewhere where it can get value, but also isn't super easy to break, is important. A good way to think about this is placing it where your opponent might have to move weird or chase it down in a specific scenario to hit it, while still covering areas that Olympia combos into. Obviously, if you place a crystal in the blast zone, it'd be pretty hard to hit for most characters, but you probably wouldn't get great value. I personally like to place it a little bit higher than where an opponent's grounded normals can normally hit. This will allow me to pop crystal or dash to it later for a combo or movement mix-up, but it'll stay just out of range of opponents' moves and force them to jump. One thing I do like to be mindful of when placing crystal, however, is to not go too high. Using crystal to punish a tech chase is really strong, so you'll want to keep its range placed well enough to do that. The best and most expressive way to use crystal in neutral, however, is by throwing crystal into an opponent at mid-range and then pressing A and B, which will allow you to dash to it, mixing two light safe hits together and allowing you to pick a third final move to end the mix, like a jab, tilt, or aerial. You can even potentially shield here to punish overeager and mashy opponents. I have a feeling that this option might get tuned down later on down the line to make it a bit less safe. But even just having crystal out in this way in general is still a threat and a mind game to the opponent, forcing them to choose between hitting it and a defensive option to prep for your dash in. If this option does get tuned down and you're watching from the future, a little less safe but scarier callout is to press neutral special twice, to throw the crystal and then halt it immediately, and then side B'ing it to get a massive hitbox on the floor. This can even be used to poke players on other platforms on stages like Godai, or used at the edge of a plat or stage to ledge cancel and hit players in the air. It's a weird mix-up and not very consistent if spammed in neutral, but it's got some crazy applications that I think someone a little better than me can figure out. Now that we know how to place crystal, let's take a quick peek at how to optimize combos after opponents are crystallized. Opponents will stay in the crystal as long as they're in hit stun, or until the crystal touches the ground. This means that Olympia can take two different routes after catching an opponent. She can either combo them while they're crystallized, allowing her to get big numbers on the board, or she can simply wait and allow the crystal to pop. This keeps opponents in hit stun for a few frames after the pop and allows her to use a combo finisher, which is great for getting consistent kills on opponents at higher percents. The last use of crystal, which we've already touched on, is using it purely for movement. You can pre-place it in spots to extend combos, like offstage slightly, allowing you to dash to it for a forward air finisher, or while recovering. MSB posted a guide on this tech, which I'll link down below, but the general idea is wall jumping, pressing B twice to throw and halt the crystal, and then pressing AB to dash to it, giving you an upward boost. This is one of the techs that I mentioned at the start that helps pad out Olympia's recovery. However, it is pretty telegraphed in my opinion, since once you start the movement, it's frame tight, so you're kinda stuck going in one direction. It also leaves your crystal in a pretty unoptimal spot for follow-ups. A way to mitigate these issues, however, is by B-reversing the input to place the crystal closer to the stage, and gain a new recovery angle. If you use wall jump near the ledge, you can also B-reverse the tech to hit opponents standing near the ledge, and then dash into them, making your ledge options pretty safe and quick, catching opponents off guard. This aggro use of Rat Trick is pretty niche, but ties together her tools when getting off the ledge, so I think it's pretty necessary to mention here. Overall, the Rat Trick is super important to learn for recovering, since it can save a stock when nothing else will. Before I move on from talking about the crystal, I gotta advise you to keep trying new things with it. Being mindful about how you place and use it is super important, since just having it on stage provides so much value due to its immense threat. The same can be said for not having it out, however, since you can't access techs like Rat Trick, or use it to stuff out an approach in neutral if it's on stage. Overall, the tool's super fluid and nuanced, so I suggest trying every way that I've mentioned in this video, and finding which way benefits your playstyle the most. Since we now know how to play neutral, combo players in the air, and use crystal effectively, I want to go over a few more niche tips that we can talk about before we talk about how to mitigate Olympia's weaknesses. You can get a lot of value out of Olympia's side B, especially on a ledge cancel. I already touched on this a little bit when talking about side B'ing the crystal, but using side B to close gaps and catch unsuspecting opponents off guard is a great way to whiff punish laggier moves. And the move even combos into itself, or an up strong depending on DI. It also confirms into a baby dash jab at lower percents, which allows you to start really big combos. It's also ledge cancelable, which I already mentioned, but this is done by landing the move on the corner of a stage or a platform and then sliding off. This allows you to be super plus on hit and kinda get whatever option you want. It's tricky to angle, but it's worth learning if you're looking to steal a stock early. Another general tip with Olympia is to be aware of how you're placing crystal. I know we just moved on from this topic, but if you place the crystal the same way repeatedly, it can become pretty easy to block and counter. Mixing it up keeps the option fluid and unpredictable, and is a must at all levels of gameplay. I talked about Olympia's tools being super fast earlier, but I didn't mention that all of her aerials are currently safe on shield. This means if you're able to get in on an opponent, you shouldn't be scared to press buttons. However, mashing on shield isn't always free. Opponents can always pick a different defensive option out of shield that you might not be safe on, and then punish you. This makes walking a fine line between abusing Olympia's strong approaches and pressure, and getting punished for pressing too many buttons. I think most players will figure this out with time though, since it's more of a nuanced idea and is applied differently in every matchup and per player to player. If you're having trouble killing an opponent, forward tilt will do the trick. I personally think this move might be tuned down over time, but not by a ton. Jab forward tilt can start killing as early as 110 at ledge on imperfect DI. This isn't a super flashy trick, but it's pretty consistent when you're not landing those big finishers that I mentioned earlier. Olympia's dash attack is cancelable into up strong. You can use Dacus to gain a burst of movement after a hit like Bear or side B to confirm into the up strong on different DIs. It's not necessarily a tech you'll use game to game, but if you find yourself on a stage with a lower ceiling, I suggest taking advantage of this tech to clean up stocks where you probably wouldn't before. After landing Olympia's Nair, the move can be cancelled with a hitfall before the second hit comes out. This leads to some pretty cool custom combos, or allows you to call out bad defensive options like a buffered air dodge. I've been using this option a lot at mid percents, but you can always cancel the move into a jab or a tilt at lower percents to start a combo. It's kinda up to you how you want to use this option, since it has so much depth when comparing it to the use of Nair 2, since that also sends it a pretty good angle. So which hitbox you opt for is up to you based on the scenario. Olympia's down tilt is so fast that it can be comboed into itself or other tilts, letting you jab, down tilt a handful of times, and then start your actual combo. This is great for racking up a smidge of extra damage before your combo gets going. However, the move can be floor hugged, so be sure not to use it too much or raw, since you might get punished instead. Since Olympia is such a fast faller, you can always hold down and ASDI down to fall out of a handful of moves or combos. This might not work on players that are more familiar with their character's kits, but if you're newer to Olympia or playing in lower to mid ranks, it's something you can definitely abuse. Moves like down B and neutral special have a cooldown before you can use them again. This prevents Olympia from dashing around everywhere and abusing them. Be sure to know these cooldowns so you don't accidentally waste frames when you are looking to use the move repeatedly. With our lightning round tips out of the way, let's talk about the qualities that hold Olympia back and how to mitigate them. Feel free to comment any questions that you have if I didn't cover something you're struggling with here, and I'll do my best to respond and help you out. To start, let's look at Olympia's run speed. She's one of the slowest characters in the game, and she's sadly lacking tools like Raster's Slipstream or Fleet's Float to help her mix up her movement naturally. So let's look at how we can mitigate the issue. First, we have Gem Dash, also known as Rat Trick, which we talked about earlier. This technique can help speed up and incorporate weird movement into Olympia's kit for sure. It can be a bit telegraphed if you use it too much, so be sure to use it just whenever you need it. If you're not using to start Gem Dash as a combo, it doesn't really do a whole lot for you. So using side B to close gaps is also an option that's a bit more aggressive. But any patient opponent won't be getting hit by that move at max range, making it sadly hair unoptimal when considering movement. However, Olympia's down B can do the trick to close gaps, or escape an opponent's threat range. By using the armor part of the move like a counter, Olympia can guard herself from attacks, while then either cancelling the move into a dash to escape a follow-up, or close a gap. She can also just use the move as a hit to follow up with an attack, netting Olympia a big combo. I really like this option when fighting characters like Fleet and Edelist that have moves that cover lots of range in a short amount of time, like Fleet's side B or Edelist's dash attack. This allows you to tank their initial hit and then deny them a combo, before cancelling into a dash to close the distance and start a combo yourself. This obviously doesn't make up for Olympia's unoptimal run speed, but it benefits slow play and allows her to close gaps all at the same time. Another pseudo-solution to this speed flaw is by implementing Wave Dash Jab to extend your range. Olympia's Wave Dash is not the best, but I'd say it's pretty good, and this can help out with her lack of range on her normals. Speaking of that, if you're having a hard time getting hits and scraps, let's say when fighting a character with a disjoint, remember that most of your moves are all pretty solid out of shield, compared to most characters at least. Taking time to properly punish opponents who are risky on shield is super important, since a lot of times it can net you big reward for not really a lot of risk. One complaint I hear a lot about Olympia is that her fast fall speed can lead to her getting blown up super quickly. This tip won't fix that per se, but being mindful of what resources you do and don't have can allow you to have more control over what combo finisher you get hit by later. For example, if you're being comboed by Rano and don't use your jump mid-combo, you can jump away from him later in the combo to dodge the forward air finisher that would normally take your saw. This tip can apply to anyone in the cast, and it's a pretty loose example, but I think it's a most helpful reminder when characters have less natural ways to save themselves in situations like this. This tip can also be considered when you think you'll need to be recovering later. Burning a resource like double jump early while on stage means you might not have it off stage if you were to get hit. Keep this in mind, especially at higher percents, since the reward of getting double jump in neutral can't compare to the risk of not having it off stage. Finally, my last tip to help mitigate Olympia's weaknesses is to not use Crystal if you find opponents breaking it or countering it consistently. Sometimes, it's okay to take a step back and choose not to use a part of your kit and only rely on it when it's necessary. This tip doesn't apply to every matchup or to every game necessarily, but I find a lot of players around my level defaulting to using the same tool repeatedly, even whenever it's not working. Be sure to use all of Olympia's kit, instead of tunneling your attention to just the high-risk, high-reward tools that might be a bit flashier. That just about wraps up my advanced Olympia guide. Truthfully, I'm not a top player, so I had a lot of help from a few community members and friends of mine to put this together. Special shout out to Jorg, Avian Attorney, Renegona, and Bloge for supplying me with tips and tricks that you've seen in this video, as well as a handful of clips. If you want to see the rest of Olympia's kit in action, be sure to check out my general Olympia guide that's on screen right now. I also have a playlist full of Rivals 2 videos that I know you'll love. Until next time though, peace.
Nothing less than total victory.